Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin in just a moment. Perhaps you have a talit at home and you're invited to put a talis on with us, reminding us that when we put the garment on, talit means garment in Hebrew, when we put the garment on, we're reasserting a sense of identity. In the days of old, 3,000 years ago, these strings testified to God's presence for the individual. That's what a talis is all about. That each one of us see himself or herself as having a closeness of God, almost, you might say symbolically, draped upon our shoulders, hence the origination. The blessing is Asher Kitchanu b'mitzvot v'tzivanu litatei patzitzit. Baruch Atoroi Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu litatei patzitzit. Try that. We're beginning in a moment in the Siddur, the prayer book, on page 101, at the top of the page, 101, the opening passage begins with the phrase, Ma Tovu, and it speaks of the goodness of having a shared place. The goodness of having homes connected one to the next, to the next, to the next. That's what Ma Tovu is all about. And we're on page 101. And for those joining in at home, your homes are connected to the synagogue. And for those here in the shul, we are sending forth a message to people who are joining in. We're on 101. Ma tovu alecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael, v'ani berov chasdecha avo v'techa, eshtachave el heichal kodshecha b'yiratecha. Adonai ahavtimon beitecha, umakom mishkan kavodecha, pani eshtachave v'yachra, evracha lifnei Adonai osi, vani tefilati lecha Adonai et ratzon, Elohim berov chasdecha, aneni bemet yishecha. And now turning to pages 103 and then 104, we rise the early morning blessings, called in Hebrew Birchot HaShachar, the early morning blessings, are designed to get us to wake up and open our eyes and look at the world around us and pay attention. The first blessing, pay attention to the birds that are chirping. And then recognizing who we are, each one of us. We're a human being, and we're created in the image of God, and we're descended from the household of Israel. Every aspect of our identity is a call for celebration. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lasechli vina lahavchin ben yom uven layla. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'asani b'tzalmo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'asani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumim. Top of 104. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamechin mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'asa likol tzarkim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael b'gvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael b'tifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten layoev koach. The bottom of 104. Today and every day, may you look upon us, and may all who see us look upon us with eyes filled with kindness, love, and compassion. Act toward us with kindly love. Baruch atah Adonai, who acts with kindly love to the people of Israel. Unenu yom v'chol yom l'cheinu chesed rachamim v'nechem necharim v'tigmulenu chasadim tovim. Baruch atah Adonai l'mesmo Yisrael. We are seated. That concluding blessing on page 104 asks us to use our eyes, not only to see, but to look. We need to look at the world, one person at a time, with a gaze of kindness. We need to use our eyes to communicate kindness and caring to the world beyond each one of us. That's what this bracha says. Open your eyes and bring kindness forth into the world. Turning to page 107, page 107. Someone asked me, what's Mishnah and Talmud? So we're going to have about a 2-minute foray in a very preliminary level to what Mishnah and Talmud is. First, we need to remember that Torah starts 3,000 years ago. And it's transmitted orally, and then eventually, after a span of 300 or 400 years, maybe 500 years, Torah coalesces into what we call the Torah, in book form and also in the scroll. As the Torah is coalescing and coming together and taking shape, and then being handed down over the centuries, there is also Jewish material, oral material, that is being transmitted generation to generation. And we call that the oral law. And that's passed down orally. And eventually, about 2,000 years ago, the oral law is finalized into something called Mishnah. And there are literally thousands of Mishnahs. The Hebrew term is Mishnayot, little pieces in there, 1, 2, 3 lines, and they talk about all manner of things. Ceremony, ritual, holiday, relationships, family, taxes, you name it, we talk about it in the Mishnah, but they're very brief. And that's about 2,000 years ago. And then as people began to continue to ask questions about Jewish life, and Torah had already been closed, and the Mishnah had been closed for a couple hundred years, people began to ask questions and examine and analyze the Mishnah, or the Mishnayot. Individuals are Mishnayot. The whole thing is called the body of Mishnah. 6 books. And those discussions and those analyses and those questions about the Mishnah are called the Talmud. So here we are on page 107. An example. Mishnah. It's the second paragraph from the bottom. Mishnah. Elu devarim she'en lehem shi'ur. These are the things that are not specified. You know, in the Torah it says, give tzedakah, it's 10%. You know, when we light Friday night candles, we light 2 candles. When do we light Friday night candles? 18 minutes before sundown. How many glasses of wine on Passover? 4 glasses of wine. How many candles on the 3rd night of Hanukkah? 3 candles, if you don't count the shamash. You and I know we have very specific numbers and elements. Very, very specific and laid out. But there are things in life that don't have a specified measure, which means that you can make up your own decisions. Hapeya, if you're a farmer and you have a farm and you designate a certain amount of crop or produce at the corner of your farm for poor people to come and harvest because they have no income, you can decide, you're probably better than me. You can say, I'm going to set a whole big corner of my field that I'm not going to harvest for my family or to sell, and poor people can come. I might be a stingy guy and say, this 1 stalk of wheat is at the corner. You can take that. It's up to you and me to exercise our own conscience. That's the first word. That's peah. Bikurim. On the holiday of Shavuot, which is a very specific holiday, you bring a certain amount of crops that have just ripened from your spring harvest to share with the Kohen. You might bring a whole truckload, a huge basket. I might bring a teacup. It's up to me to decide. Re'ayon, that's a holiday festival offering. Again, you might bring something generous. I might be a stingy kind of a guy. Here's the next part. Now we're leaving the tangibles behind, and we're getting on the symbolic and spiritual level. Gemilut chasadim, acts of kindness. You can decide to be as kind as you wish every single day, or you can decide to refrain a little bit. And that's up to you. In your interactions with humanity, whether it's somebody who's poor or somebody who's sad or somebody who's lonely or somebody who's sick or somebody who needs a friend, it's up to you and me to decide how we want to interact with that person. And the last line is Talmud Torah, studying Torah. There's no specified amount of studying Torah. One person might spend 5 minutes, one person might spend hours and hours. It's up to the individual. All that's contained in the Mishnah. 2,000 years ago. Guess what? The Talmud said 300 years later, we're going to analyze that. And so this is one small analysis, and there are pages more, but this is one small analysis of the first line that you just studied, which was the Mishnah. And that's Talmud here on the bottom of the page. Guess what? Elu dvarim she'adam ochel perotehem. You know what? You're right. There are all these things that you can decide how you're going to do them in this world. But furthermore, the people of the Talmud's age, about 1,600 years ago, had another perspective as well. And the additional perspective was that depending upon your behavior in this world, after your death, in effect, your soul would benefit from all the deeds that you accomplished in this lifetime. Now, bear in mind, there are many Jewish perspectives as to what happens after we die. Some Jewish tradition teaches that once you're dead, you're dead. That's it. We live in the here and the now. That's actually probably the primary theme, you might say. But there are some Jewish opinions that teach that after we die, in some way we continue on. We're not going to get into that right now. I'm teaching you Talmud. Here we go. This is the Talmudic embellishment of the Mishnah. Here we go. These are the things that a person literally will benefit from in this world, but also he or she will benefit from in the time to come. And these are they: kibud av ha'em, honoring one's parents; ugmilut chasadim, doing deeds of kindness; hashkamat beit midrash shacharit va'arvit, getting to synagogue early on time for the morning service and the evening service; haknasat orchim, bringing invited guests in and welcoming guests so that they are comfortable, hospitality; uvikur cholim, visiting the sick; v'achnasat kala, attending to the needs of a bride. For example, and there's a whole section in the Talmud about this. Let's say there's a woman and she is going to be married and she can't afford a dress. The community raises funds to buy a dress for this woman because on her wedding day, every woman should feel like a queen. That's an important tradition, goes back 1,800 years. Ulvayat hamet, and attending to the needs of the dead. And there are a number of elements in this little phrase, attending to the needs of the dead. It means, number one, making sure that the family has a burial plot. Number two, physically caring for the deceased, and you've heard of the Chevra Kadisha, and that is part of this, preparing for the burial and so on. And number three, supporting and emotionally sustaining and caring for the family after the funeral. Nowadays we call it Shiva. All that is contained in here. Iyun tefillah, focus and concentration during prayer. Havat shalom ben adam l'chavero uven ish lishto, and working to encourage peace between two people, whether they are neighbors or whether it's a married couple. Trying to help bring peace to people who are in conflict. That's an important element within Jewish tradition. If we can we establish peace between people, individuals who are in conflict? That's in the Talmud. Now, that's not mentioned anywhere in the Mishnah about bringing food or taking care of the poor. That's the Talmudic embellishment and elucidation, you might say. There's no limit on how much effort we should apply to trying to bring peace to people who are in conflict. Just as there's no limit to caring for somebody who is suffering a loss or a bride preparing for her wedding day. Do you understand what's going on? So this is Talmud, almost finished. The Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, and studying Torah equals all of these elements. We now need to continue on with the rest of the service, but at some point, if people have questions about Talmud, feel free to contact me. Maybe we can go into a little bit more detail. For now, we are turning to the Psalm for Shabbat on page 100 and, pardon me, page 112. Page 112, the Psalm for Shabbat. Mizmor shir liyom HaShabbat, tov lahodot l'Adonai, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon, lahagid baboker chastecha, ve'emunatcha balelot, Alei asor v'alei navel, alei higayon bechinor, mizmor shir liyom haShabbat, tov lodot ladonai, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon, ki simach Adonai b'falecha, b'masei yadecha aranein, magalu masecha Adonai mod, amaku makshavotecha, mizmor shir leyom haShabbat, tov lodot ladonai, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon. How wonderful are your works, Adonai, how subtle your designs. The arrogant do not understand, the fool does not comprehend this. The wicked flourish like grass, and every evildoer blossoms, only to be destroyed forever. But you, Adonai, are exalted for all time. Surely your enemies, Adonai, surely your enemies will perish. All who commit evil will be scattered. As a wild bull raises up its horn, you raised my head high, anointed it with fresh oil. As my enemies gather against me, my gaze remains steady, for my ears listen and hear. The righteous flourish like the date palm, thrive like a cedar in Lebanon. Planted in the house of Adonai, they flourish in their God's courtyards. In old age, they remain fruitful, still fresh and bountiful, proclaiming, Adonai is upright, my rock in whom there is no flaw. Baruch Shamar on page 122. Baruch Shamar v'haya ha'olam, Baruch hu, Baruch oseh v'reishit, Baruch omer v'oseh, Baruch gozer u'mekayim, Baruch mirachem al haaretz, Baruch mirachem al habriot, Baruch mishalem sachar tov lireyav, Baruch chaylod v'kayom lo netzach, Baruch podeh u'matzil, Baruch Shemo. On the English side. The singular one who gives life to the world, the sovereign who is praised and glorified forever and ever. This is your great name. Baruch atah Adonai, sovereign, celebrated with songs of praise. Yachid Chayol Olamim Melech Mishabachu B'Far Hadei Ad Shemo Gadol Baruch atah Adonai Melech Molo Batish Bachot. And now on page 136, Ashrei, page 136, Ashrei, from the book of Psalms, page 136, the Ashrei. Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, Od Yalucha Selah, Ashreyam Shekachalo, Ashreyam Sharonoi Elov, Tehillah LeDavid, Aromim Chalhai HaMelech, Vavrachashim Chalelam Voed, B'chol Yom Avarchekam, V'halashim Chalelam Voed, Gadol Arnoi Molol Ma'od, V'lig Dulato En Cheker, Dolador Yeshabach Masecha, Ugvurotecha Yagidu, Hadar Kavod Hodecha, V'divrei Niflotecha Asicha, Ve'ezus Norotecha Yomero, Ugadolatcha Asapreno, Zecherav Tuvacha Yabiyo, V'tzit Katacha Yeranenu, Chanun Rachum Adonai, Erech Apayim Ugdol Chased, Tov Adonai lakol, Rachamav al kol ma'asov. Yoduch Adonai kol ma'asecha, V'chasidecha yevarchucha. Kavod malchutcha yameiro, V'gavoratecha yedabeiro. Lodia livnei hadam gavoratav, V'chavod hadar malchuto. Malchutcha malchut kol olamim, Umem shaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. Somech Adonai l'chol hanoflim, v'zokef l'chol hakfufim. Enei chol elecha yisabero, v'ata noten lem et achlam be'ito. Poteach et yadecha, umaspia l'chol chayratzon. Tzadik Adonai b'chol drachov, v'chasid b'chol ma'asov. Karov Adonai l'chol korov, l'chol asher yikro'u v'emet. Ritzon Rav Ya'aseh, v'yet Shabbatam Yishma v'yoshiem. Shomer Adonai et kol ohavov, v'yet kol harshaim yashmid. Ti'elat Adonai yidaber pi, v'yivarech kol basar, shem gachal elam voed. V'anachnu nevarech Yah, me'atav yad olam. Hallelujah. And on the top of page 141, top of 141. Yalla la 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 la, yalla la 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 la, yalla la yalla la yalla la, yalla la yalla la 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 la, yalla la yalla la la, yalla la la, yalla la yalla la la, yalla la la. Hallelujah, 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 el bekacho, hallelujah, beki auza, hallelujah, big veratav, hallelujah, karov gulo, yalala, 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 la 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 la, yalala, yalala, yalala. Yalala, yalala, la 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 la. Halala, betek hashafar. Halala, benevel v'chinor. Halala, betov u'machol. Halala, b'minin v'ugav. Yalala, la 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 la. Yalala, yalala, la 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 la. Yalala, yalala, yalala. Yalala, yalala, la 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 la. Halala, betzatzalei shema. Halala, betzatzalei shema. Kol shema. Hallelujah, hallelujah, yalala, la 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 la, yalala, la 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 la, yalala, la 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 la, yalala, la 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 la, yalala, 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 konshema, hallelujah, hallelujah, konshema. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Every soul can and does and will call out to God. You and I have the inclination. Can we open our souls to calling out to God in singing, in prayer, in personal awareness? Shabbos morning, Thursday afternoon. Are you and I willing to open our souls and calling out to God? On page 145. Nishmat kol chai tevarech et shimcha Adonai Eloheinu. The first three lines in English and then a few moments of thought. The soul of all that lives praises your name, Adonai, our God. The spirit of all flesh exalts you, our sovereign always. From the very beginning to the very end of time, you are God. Beside you, we have no sovereign. Page 145. page 147, Shochen Ad. Shochen Ad, the first little red arrow. Shochen Ad Marom V'kadosh Shemo V'chatuv Ranano Tzadikim Badonoi Laisharim Nova Tehillah B'fi Yesharim Tit Halal U'v'divrei Tzadikim Tit Barach U'v'shon Chasidim Tit Ramam U'v'kerev Kedoshim Tit Kadash U'v'makalot Rivavot Amcha Beit Yisrael Lodo lahalel, leshabech lefael, lerameim lahader, levrele kales. Kol v'shur v'tish b'chot David ben Yishai, Abdecha Meshichecha, top of 148. Yishtabach Shimcha La'ad Malkeinu, Ha'el HaMelech Hagadol v'Hakadosh B'Shamayim u'Ba'aretz. Ki lecha noe Adonai Eloheinu v'Eloi Avotenu v'Imotenu Shir u'shvacha Halel v'Zimra Ozu memshala Netzach Gedula u'Gvura Tila v'Tiferet Kedusha u'Malchut Brachot Vorot Me'ata v'Ad Olam Baruch Atah Adonai El Melech Gadol Ishpachot Elodot Adonai Niflot Habocher B'Shirei Zimra Melech Elchei Olamim Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabo v'omad yivrach yirtei v'imlech malkutei b'chayechon v'yom echon v'chayechol beit Yisrael v'agalav izman kari v'imaro Amen Yehei shemei rabo mevarach l'olam u'me'amayot Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yinaseh v'yithadar v'yitale v'yitalosh medekudisha brechu leila min kol berchata v'shirata tishbechata v'nechemata dami ram yom avimaro Amen. We rise, Baruch Hu 149. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Voed. Top of 150. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Yotzer or vorech choshech Oseh shalom Uvorei et hakol. Baruch Atah Adonai, our God, sovereign of time and space, forming light and creating darkness, bringing harmony while creating all. And we are seated, turning to page 151, creating all. This is a poem, and it speaks of the entire universe as being created. And within the universe, also in this embellished poem, is the feature or the note that there are angels here. So the question is, are you and I opening our eyes and our minds to the idea, to the presence of angels, of God's touch in our world, in our physical world? El Adon al kol amasim baruch b'fi kol neshama gadlo v'tuvo amalei olam da'at u'tvuna sovavim moto hamid gael chayot hakodesh v'nera b'chavod al merkava zechot mishor lifnei chiso chesed v'rachamim lifnei chavodo tovim ma'orot shebara Eloheinu Yetzaram Medat Bavina Ovaskel Koach Ugvura Hanatan Bahem Liot Moshlim Bekerev Tevel Muleim Zivam Fikim Hanoga Noezivam Chololam Semechim Betzaitam Vesasim Bavoam Osim Biema Ritzon Konam Per Vachavod Notnim Lishmo Tzahalavarina Lezechem Alchuto Kara Lashemesh Vayizrach Ora Avetken Surat Halbana Shevak Notnim Lo Kol Tzeva Maram Tiveret Gedula Srafim V'Ovanim V'Chayot HaKodesh Yada 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 The last three lines on page 153. In God's goodness, the work of creation is renewed each day. As the psalmist declared, thank the Creator of the great lights, for God's love is everlasting. Cause a new light to shine on Sion, and may we all soon be worthy of its illumination. Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir. V'nizka cholanu mehera leoro, v'nizka cholanu mehera leoro, Baruch atah Adonai Yotzer Hamorot. The top of page 154 on the English side, the top of page 154, the first English paragraph. 5 lines up from the bottom of that first paragraph. It begins with enlighten. It's those last 5 lines of the first paragraph. And I think we're supposed to hold on to the idea of light, which is in the Borchu and these successive paragraphs. That element of light is supposed to infuse our eyes as we prepare for Shema. Enlighten our eyes with your Torah. Attach our hearts to your mitzvot. Unify our hearts to love and revere your name so that we never lose hope. As we trust in your great, holy, awe-inspiring name, we will delight and rejoice in your deliverance. Those wearing talit, gather the tzitziot together. The bottom of page 154. V'havienu l'shalom me'arba kanfot haaretz v'tolichenu komemiyot le'artzenu ki el po al yeshuot ata uvanu v'charta mikolam b'lashon v'keraftonu l'shimcha hagadol Selah bemet lohodo lecha ol yachercha bi'ahava Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'mo Yisrael bi'ahava. 155. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. V'yavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'otecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha V'shinatam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'beitecha u'v'lechtecha v'derech ובשכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. The first paragraph in silence on 156. Middle of 156. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor taber el bnei Yisrael v'artalehem v'asu lahem tzitzit al kanfei vigadehem ledorotam v'natnu al tzitzit hakanaf petil techelet v'yolachem letzitzit uritem oto uschartem et kol mitzvot Adonai v'asitem otam v'lo taturu acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem asher atem zonim achareihem Lamon tizkaru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'item krushim leloechem ani Elohechem asher tzeti etchem meretz Mitzrayim liot lachem leElohim ani Elohechem Adonai Elohechem emet. On page 158, Michamoch in the center of the page 158. Michamocha boelim Adonai Michamocha nedar b'kodesh noratilot osefele Shira chadasha shibchu geulim l'shimcha asefat hayam yachad kulam hodu v'nichu v'yamro Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed tzor Yisrael kuma be'ezrat Yisrael avadech inemecha Yehuda b'Yisrael Israel, go aleinu, Adonai tzavot shemo, Kiddush Yisrael. We begin aloud on pages 159, 60, and 61, and thereafter we continue in silence, 162 to 166, we're offering a silent private prayer, beginning aloud. And we know that some people are learning Hebrew, and if they appreciate or rely on the phonetic, that's found here on pages 466. It's the transliteration of the opening 3 pages, beginning aloud, and thereafter we have a chance to continue on in silence. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu Elohei Abraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor V'Anora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'Konei HaKol V'Zocher Chastei Avot v'imahot, u'mevi goel livnei b'neihem, l'man shmo b'yahava. Melech Ozer Pokeinu Moshiach Umagen Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Abraham Upoked Sarah Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai Mechayei Meitim Atah Rav LaHoshia Mashiv Ruach Umorid Agashem Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed Mechayei Meitim Berachamim Rabim Samech Noflim Berofech Cholim O Matir Asurim O Mekayim Emunato Lishenei Afar Micha Mocha Bal Givurot O Medam Melach Melech Meimit O Mechayeh O Matmiach Yeshua V'ne'eman ata lachayot meitim Baruch atah Adonai Mechayei hameitim Nekadesh et shimcha b'olam Kishem shemakdishim oto b'shmei marom Kagotu v'yanviecha V'kara ze el ze v'yamar Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzavot, Melech Tzvaro, Az B'kol Rash Gadol, Adir v'chazak mashmiim kol, Min nasim l'umat serafim, l'umatam Baruch Yomeru. Baruch V'noi Mimkom, Mimkomcha, Malkeinu Tofia, V'timloch Leinu, Ki Mechakim Anachnu Lach, Matai Timloch B'Tzion, B'krov Yemei Elom Bo'ed Tishkon, Titkara V'tikadash B'Shalayim Echa, L'dor V'dor Netzach Netzachim, V'yeneinu Tirena, Malchotecha, Kadavar Hamor B'shirei Uzecha Al Yedei David Mashiach Tzidkecha Yimloch Olam L'Hach Tzion L'dor V'dor Hallelujah L'dor V'dor Nagig Alecha L'netz Netzachim Kedushatcha Nakdish V'shivcha Chalim L'Shalom Bo'ed Ki El Megavarashata Baruch Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. Oh, and keep Yochanan here. Keep Yochanan here. Oh, yeah. page 167. Yitkara vikara shemera ba fimero amen yeshmera ba mevarach la lam lial me almaya yitborach vishtabach shmei kudisha brechu shemero amen shemero amen shemero amen supremo vishtamal shemero amen. Our Torah service begins on page 168, and just a note, we're going to add a special prayer once we are standing with the ark open, and the prayer is here on that table in the center aisle. It's an English prayer on behalf of Ukraine. So I do ask you to have an English page. We'll begin in a moment, page 168, En Kamocha. En kamocha Elohim Adonai v'en k'ma'asecha malchutecha malchut kol olamim umemshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor Adonai melech Adonai malach Adonai yimloch le'olam voed Adonai oz li'amo yitein Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom Av harachamim heitiv avirtzoncha et Tzion tivnei chomot Yerushalayim tivnei chomot Yerushalayim kivecha levad v'tachnu melech elam v'nisa Adon olamim. We rise, the Aron is open, page 168. Vayhi bin Soa ha'aron vayomer Moshe Kuma Adonai ve'afutzu evecha ve'anosu mesanecha mipanecha ki mitzion tetzei Torah Ki mitzion tetzei Torah Odavar Adonai mirushalayim Baruch shenatan Torah Baruch shenatan Torah La'amo Yisrael B'kedushato. A prayer for Ukraine. And if you're joining in from home, perhaps you can pull up the email that we sent out day before yesterday, Thursday evening. This is a prayer that comes forth from the Masorti community. It's the sister movement, the conservative movement, and it's in Israel. And Masorti has done exceptional outreach to the people of Europe for years, but especially recently, in terms of raising funds and sending support and offering communications and helping relocating some families who actually have left Ukraine. And there are hundreds of Masorti synagogues all over Israel and Europe and conservative synagogues around the world that are saying these prayers. And our voices are joining with literally thousands and thousands of people with the same words and the same hope. God in heaven, creator of all flesh, worker of wonders, do not stay silent, do not remain voiceless, do not keep aloof. For an evil man has come to power and declared war on another country, saying, "We will rise up violently against you in battle." But you, God, have commanded us in your sacred scriptures, saying, "Do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. I am God. Therefore, make the aggressor desist from destruction." We pray to you now, God of the spirits of all flesh, to use your infinite power to end these acts of bloodshed and terror. Spread peace across the earth and bring joy to all its inhabitants, so that the words of the prophets can be fulfilled. The warrior's bow will be broken, and peace will be promised to all peoples. God will judge between the nations and arbitrate between many countries. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. And let us say, Amen. On page 170, the bottom stanza. Be'on arachetz v'lish mekarisha karisha yakira anna emar tushbechan be'on arachetz v'lish mekarisha karisha yakira anna emar tushbechan yehera avakadamach detiftach libi v'yoraita v'tashli mishalin t'libi v'liba dechol amach Yisrael letavo lechayin v'lishlam. Amen. Page 171.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo. Galul Anoitin Ramamash Moyachtav. Cha Adonai Agetul Avagavor Avatiferet Be'anetzach Be'ahod Kichol Bashamayim Uvaretz Kichol Bashamayim Uvaretz Cha Adonai Hamamlocha V'amid Naseh L'chol Rosh Romemo, Romemo, Adonai Eloheinu, Ve'ishtachabu, Ve'ishtachabu, L'Adam Raglav Kadoshu, Romemo, Romemo, Adonai Eloheinu, Ve'ishtachabu, Ve'ishtachabu, Le'ar Kodsho, Le'ar Kodsho, Ki Kadosh, Adonai Eloheinu. We are seated. Shkol Gadil. Thank you, Dan. We are seated. There's a chazak, exactly. So at the very end, I'm going to ask you and Dan to hold this up. It's Chazak Chazak today. And just stand here. I'll prompt it. Yes. The Torah reading today is found on page 570 in our Chumash, page 570. If you're joining it at home, it's page 570. If you have a Tanakh at home and not Chumash, it's the book of Exodus, chapter number 40. Chapter number 40 of Exodus, verse number 17, and then following as we move forward during the Torah reading. Excuse me. This is the very concluding Torah reading of the book of Exodus. Shemot is coming to a conclusion, and that means that next week we'll begin the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. And therefore, at the end of the Torah reading, we'll chant Chazak, Chazak Benit Chazek, and we'll talk about that in just a little while. But for now, we're reminding ourselves that we've been sitting, standing, working, living at the base of Mount Sinai for a year. And we've been establishing collectively the tabernacle, the worship space. And what's been reiterated over the past 4 Torah readings, and this is the 5th, over 5 Torah readings, is that every person in Israel was involved. Yes, of course, Moses is conveying the message from God as to how to divvy up the labor. And 2 chief artists, Bezalel and Oholiav, have been taking the lead in the design and the construction phases, which indicates that Moses doesn't have to do everything, which is a very important statement because all of us have skills and talents and abilities that can be shared. And time and again within the messaging of these 5 Torah readings is that every person has a role to play. Every person is essential in the establishment of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, which prompts the thought that it's much more than a building, a structure with walls and beams and hooks and tapestries. It's the embodiment of every single person as she and he brings something and offers something of the hands and of the spirit. So here we're on 570. Oren ben Daniel Cohen, Pushato, Patrochem, Hayom. It is. Pardon me, it's page 569, chapter 40. 569, chapter 40. Right up there.
This is a very appropriate one for me. Baruch Hu et Adonai Amvorah.
Baruch Le'olam Voed.
Baruch Le'olam Voed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lemor b'yom ha'chodesh harishon b'chad l'chodesh takim et mishkan ohel moed v'samta sham et Aaron ha'edud v'sakota al Aaron et ha'kaporet ve'vet et ha'shulchan v'rachta et erko ve'veta et ha'menorah v'leita et neroteha.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nasa b'tocheinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yeah, take one. So we're excited that you're here. Shkoyach.
Yeah.
And B'Shah Tovah. Hello, Yohan. You want to bring him up? Yeah, I love having babies with the people. Come on up.
Let's see what he does.
Okay, come on up. Yamod Shmuel Halevi Lelevi. On page 569, it's verse number 5.
Oh, sure.
So, hello, come on up. We have a baby in the house. It's so much fun having a baby in the house.
A about 11 plus years, you can give him the first Aliyah.
Halavai, how exciting. So you heard the word menorah. So obviously the menorah, that's the 7-branched flame holder, and that's part and parcel of the Mishkan. And I point out over and over again, and we have our own menorah here. The menorah is the preeminent element of Jewish symbolism, bringing light into the world and reiterating the message that people came together, number one, to share their material wealth so that Betzalel could fashion a menorah. So every time you look at a 7-branch menorah, what you're really looking at is the shared collaborative effort of a number of people, all to bring light into a darkened space. If that doesn't reestablish who we are in this world, I don't know what will. So we Jews must bring light. We're a small community, just a number of millions across the globe. But just picture what would happen if millions of light went into a darkened space. That's menorah. Second Aliyah. Natata. Baruch Adonai Baruch Olam Vaed. Amen. V'natata et mizbach hazav l'toret lifnei Aaron ha'edut. V'natata et mizbach hazav l'toret lifnei Aaron ha'edut. V'samta et masach ha'petach l'mishkan. V'natata et mizbach ha'olah lifnei petach mishkan oel moed. V'natata et hakior ben ol moed u'ben ha'mizbech. V'natata sham mayim. Easy. It's okay. Amen. Can you have candy? Is he too young?
Too young.
Okay.
And also ethical concerns.
Oh, okay. Got it. No, that's okay. Easy. So, may I call you up? Ta'amod. Chan Rivka bat. Freda Yudit v'Ufay Mordechai l'Shlishi. So please come over here. So the third Aliyah is verse number 8, V'samta Techatzer. Right there, V'samta.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorah.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Olam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Olam Vaed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch Ata Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. ושמת את החצר סביב, ונתת אל מסך שער החצר, ולקחת את שמן המשחה, ומשחת את המשכן, ואת כל אשר בו, וקידש אותו וכל כליו, והיה קודש, ומשחת את המזבח, ומשחת את מזבח עולה וכל כליו, וקידשת את המזבח, והמזבח קודש קודשים.
Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet b'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch Ata Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Shkoyach. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh. Katie, may I call you up? Tamon is it over Emmanuel Levi. This is exciting. Levi. Here we go. We're reading the Torah today. We have a minyan, and so we're reading Torah. How exciting! There's Torah in the house. It's it's verse number 11 on page 569, verse number 11. Umashakta takior. There it is. Umashakta. Baruch Hanai Baruch Olam Bo'ed. Amen. Umashakta takior vet kano vikashato vikrafta taron vet panav no petakalel moed prochasotam amayim vilbashat aron et bidei kodesh umashakta to vikirashto to v'chenli viet panav takriv vilbashatam kutanot umashaktotam kaasher mashaktat avihem v'chenu li baital yolam mashkatam lichunat olam l'doratam v'yas Moshe kichol asher tibaranoi oto ken asa.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah v'nebechayelim v'tzedekenu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu
Amen. Shkoyach. Blessings, thank you. Devorah may call you up. Tamod. Devorah bat Yosef b'tovalea le chamishi. And what's mine? Right there in just a minute. So this aliyah begins on page 570, verse number 17. In the first month of the second year, on the first of the month, the tabernacle was set up. The first month of the second year, that means that it's been a whole year since the Israelites left Egypt. They left Egypt, they came to Mount Sinai, they were standing at Mount Sinai. Moses went up for the first set. He brought down the plaques. You remember the golden calf episode, the debacle. Then he went back up, came back down, and that's when they began to work to gather all the materials to build the tabernacle. The Hebrew word is mishkan, mishkan. And many Jewish people have lost that word, but it's a very important word. It's much better than tabernacle. Mishkan has the sense that God dwells. And some Jewish people know the word Shekhinah, which is a beautiful mystical term and refers to the idea that God has a sheltering, dwelling presence all about the world. And halabai, we have the Shekhinah dwelling upon us. So Mishkan is that Hebrew term, and the Israelites used the Mishkan for near unto 400 years. At this point in time, during the traveling of the 40 years, and then eventually moving into the Promised Land, and then for hundreds of years, it moved from point A to point B, and eventually the temple was built, the temple built by Solomon. But the Mishkan was the method of galvanizing the Jewish spiritual community for centuries. And I think there's a hidden tone within the Bible, almost a little bit of reluctance to have the temple built by Solomon. That's an hour-long class. The advantage of having the temple built by Solomon is that it's a big, gorgeous building. But there's a disadvantage, because for 400 years, the Mishkan wandered with us and moved with us. And there were times when we were settled in the Promised Land, and the Mishkan moved from point A to point B to point C, traveling around. So in times of need, you might say spiritual or national need, the presence of God through this tabernacle was moving to wherever people were. So on some occasions it'd be in your neighborhood or in your neighborhood or in your neighborhood. That's a very important, very powerful message with all of its furnishings included. And that might be why I think there's a kind of a tone of almost disappointment and maybe even a little bit of loss that emerges from reading certain sections in the Bible, Book of Kings, that talk about the construction of the tabernacle, of the temple in place, which replaced the tabernacle. Oh, I'm sorry, you kissed already. You kissed already.
Baruch hu et Adonai Hamorah.
Baruch
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu et Torah.
Amen. ויהי בחודש הראשון, בשנה השנית, באחד לחודש הוקם המשכן, ויקם משה את המשכן, ויתן את אדניו, וישם את קודשיו, ויתן את בריחיו, ויקם את עמודיו, ויפרוש ידו על המשכן, וישם את מכסהו אל עליו מלמעלה, כשציוונו את משה, ויקח ויתן את העדות אל הארון, וישם את הבדים על הארון, ויתן את הכפורת על הארון מלמעלה, ויבא את הארון אל המשכן, וישם את פרוכת המסך, ויוסף על ארון העדות, כשציוונו את משה.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu torat emet b'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Shkoyach. Shabbat shalom. So we begin on, is it Vayitain? I lost my place. Vayitain Kapurat? Vayitain. Okay, thank you. Vayitain. So that is verse number 20. Verse 20. No, it's verse 20. Did I stop here? No, Vayitain. No, it's verse 22. 571. So, Murray, would you like an aliyah? Yeah, come on up, Murray. Yeah, it's verse 22, page 571, verse 22. Okay. So, Murray, wait 1 second. So, this is it's a long aliyah. It's page 571, and it goes into the top of 572. But near the end of the aliyah, we stand. I'm going to raise my hand. We all stand up because this is the end of the book of Exodus. And there's a phrase that we say, and the phrase is Chazak, v'nit chazek. Can I bring it up here? You just unroll that. So for those who are a little rough in the Old Hebrew, this is Chazak, v'nit chazek. Can you put two in there? So this is at the very last sentence of the Torah reading. So this is Shvi. Kohen, Levi, Shlishi, Revi, Chamishi, Shishi. Did I miscount? Oh, I need to get at least up for Shvi'i. Okay, I miscounted. Okay, well then give me a second. I need to break it. Hold on 1 second. I apologize. I made a mistake. See, it's always Chamishi. I always get messed up at Chamishi. Okay. Okay, pardon me, folks. Right? I'm out of practice. We haven't read Torah in how long? It's a long time. boy. Okay, so pardon, Shishi. Yamod, what's your Jewish name?
Moshe Ben Yonah.
Yamod Moshe Ben Yonah Shishi. Okay, I need to break it for a second. Wait, okay. All right, Gadiel, that's going to be in the next aliyah. Vayitain. So we're gonna break at Vayater of Ktoret Samim Kasher Tiva Hashem et Moshe, which is going to be okay. I got it. Good. Okay, so Vayitain.
Baruch Adonai Habarak.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Olam Boed.
Baruch Le'olam Bed. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam. Asher baka avonu b'kol hamim v'natanu et torato. Baruch Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vayiten et shulchan b'ol moed al yerach hamishkan tzafona michutz laparochet vayruch alav erech lechem lifnei Adonai kasher tziv Adonai et Moshe vayosem et hamenorah b'ol moed nochach hashulchan al yerach hamishkan negma v'al hanerot lifnei Adonai kasher tziv Adonai et Moshe vayosem et mizbach ha'zahav b'ol moed lifnei haparochet vayter alav ktoret samim kasher tziv Adonai et Moshe.
Baruch Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam. Asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayenu nota b'tokenu. Baruch Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Take
Thank
again.
you.
Take one for Cindy
Okay,
too.
all right.
Take
Good,
one for
thank
Cindy.
you.
Good. Shabbos. Okay, can you stand over here for a second? Shabbat shalom. Tamod. Liora Miriam Bat. Freddie Yehuda B'Fai Mordechai Lishvi. Woohoo! Chazak. This is exciting. Woohoo! So Chazak begins. It's verse 28 on page 571. Verse 28 goes all the way through to page 572, and then we'll stop. And Kianan, and I'll raise my hand. We all stand up. So, verse 28. Or you can start standing up now if you want to get ready. Verse 28. Here, take you. You're welcome. Thank you.
Baruch et Adonai Hamborach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Olam Boed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Ba'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vayasem el masach petach lemishkan b'mizbach ha'olam petach mishkan oel moed vayalala bet ha'olah bet mincha ka'asher tziv Adonai et Moshe vayasem et gior ben oel moed ben mizbeach beitain Sham Mayim L'Rachza Fakatu Mimenu Moshe Baron Uvanav Edideim Beroglehem Babam Elol Moed V'Karvatam El HaMizbeach Yirchatzu Kasher Tzivarnoi Et Moshe Vayokam Et HaChatzer Saviv HaMishkan UMizbeach V'Yitein Masach Sharei HaChatzer Vayachal Moshe Tamalacha Vayachas Hanan Et Ol Moed Uchavod Anoi Moed Mishkan, Boyachol Moshe Lavo El Ol Moed, Kishachan Alav Hanan, Uchavod Adonai Moleet Hamishkan, Fe'elot Hanan Me'al Hamishkan, Yisu Bnei Yisrael B'chol Masayim, V'im Lo Yeleh Hanan V'lo Yisu Ad Yom Heloto, Ki Anan Adonai Al Hamishkan, Yomam Va'esh Tielai Labo, Lene Kol Beit Yisrael B'chol Masayim. Chazak, 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 v'nit chazek.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Shkoyach. Ooh, that's exciting. We got a chazak. You may be seated. Oh, Lisa, do you want to do a Chatzi Kaddish?
Yitkadal, Yitkadal, Shemirava.
Amen.
Mati Rafirte, Viamlich Machute.
B'chaye chonu b'yome chonu chaye dechol Beit Yisrael. Bagala, bagala, uvisman kariv, vimeru, amen. Yehishme rabba mevarach, olam liolme olmaya yitbarach.
Yibarach, Vishtabach, Vibar, Vitrama, Vinase, Vitadar, Vitale, Vitalel, Shemere Kudesha.
Brecho,
Ela, Mikol Berchata, Veshirata.
tush bechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'olma v'imeru, amen. Shkoyach, thank you. Ooh, I'm excited. This is so much fun. Maybe seated. This is so much fun. Woo-hoo. Thank you. We haven't read Torah in a long, long time because we haven't had a minyan in the building. And it's just very emotional to be able to say that we now have a minyan in the building, and we read Torah, and we had Kaddish, and the Reddish family is here, marking a special turning point in their lives. Lisa and Allison and Oren are joining other members of the Reddish family, and Lisa and Allison's father's unveiling is tomorrow. So the family has gathered to demonstrate memory and love on the occasion of unveiling the headstone, of dedicating the monument, and the family's now in Mobile, and Allison and Lisa and Oren and Johan, grandson, came to Shul, and we had a minyan, we read Torah, and we concluded the book of Shemot in association with this, and that's very meaningful, and blessings and shkoyach and todah. And we paused the Torah reading, and you might ask, what could be so important to pause the Torah reading? And the answer is saying a prayer of healing for those who are ill, which we call the Mishaberach. And if you know if someone was ill, you're invited to mention her or his name at this time, along with the names that we have here before us. Mishaberach Atenu Avos V'Dem Yisrael Rachel Leah Raped Kol Chol Melev Zekolel Et Yintel Bat Gisha Chanasar Peshalea Avram Yehuda Ben Gisha Elalea Bat Aviva Claudia Thomas, Robin Mayer, Spencer Babashi, Miriam Babashi, George Patinos, Wendy Fastman, Tom Bastoni, Avi Moshe Ben Mendelchana, Billy Singleton, Yaakov Ben Leora, Bruce Kahn, Diane Sizemore, Amelia Rose Bat Amanda Jean, Tobalea Bat Freda, Shira Vot Bat Sarah, Anna Moret, David Shlomo Ben Tovanachum Ben Yamin, Navaronit Bat Aliza, Tom McCarthy, Haim Fan, Zach McKiernan, David Ben Zalman, Lori Davis Curtis, Victor Gonsulin, Karnei Chaya Batzaremenu, Pat Cockrell, Rivka Chavsha Bat Lifsha, Vekulim Shni Skrim, Mehe Rav Shem 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 Haskar Namar Amen. Almighty God, as you have blessed all of our mothers and our fathers, bring forth blessings of healing and renewed strength and vitality for all of our loved ones, your children, your sons and daughters. Favor them with your presence and your closeness. Envelop them with the Shekhinah, your presence of gentle power and reassuring hope, into the minds, into the hearts, into the spirits, into the flesh of all of your loved ones, all of our loved ones, and reestablish them moving into the days yet to come with the capacity to stand up, to step forward and to walk, to step forward without pain, with lessenings of anxiety and of fear. Strengthen them and strengthen us all that we might reach forth our hands, just as your hands are coming forth to all of our loved ones. Hear this prayer on this Shabbat and on into the future. We all say, Amen. Thank you.
You doing Haftorah?
I'm doing a brief Haftorah.
Yeah, I'm off, and I'll try and attend the Hamaftir Chazal.
Thank you. We'll do a quick maftir. Maftir is the last paragraph on page. It's 571 onto the top of 572. Baruch hu et Adonai hamborach. Baruch Adonai Baruch Olam Loed Baruch Adonai Baruch Asher B'chabrim Kolim Natan Torah Baruch Adonai Noten Torah. Vayachas Hanan El Moed Uchvor Adonai Malei Et HaMishkan V'Yochom Moshe Lavo Ol Moed Ki Shachan Alav Hanan Uchvor Adonai Malei Et HaMishkan Felot Hanan Me'al HaMishkan Yisu B'nei Yisrael B'chol Masehem V'im Lo Yeleh Hanan V'lo Yisu Ad Yom Heloto Ki Hanan Adonai El HaMishkan Yomam Ba'esh Ki Elai Labo Le'nei Kol Beit Yisrael B'chol Masehem. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haMashiach natan Torah b'chayim v'Adonai noten Torah. Todah Lisa Torah. Please rise as the Torah is lifted and dressed, and then we'll do an abbreviated Haftorah. So, Cindy, do you want to address the Torah? Yes. Come on up. V'zot HaTorah asher sam Moshe livnei b'nei Yisrael al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe. Dundai, 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 dai, dundai, 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 dai, dundai, 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 dai, dundai, 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 dai. Eretz Yisrael b'li Torah, hikegu b'li neshama. Eretz Yisrael b'li Torah, hikegu b'li neshama. Dundai, 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 dai, dundai, 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 dai. Dundai, 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 dai, dundai, 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 dai. Eretz Yisrael b'li Torah, hikegu b'li neshama. Eretz Yisrael b'li Torah, hikegu b'li neshama. Dundai, 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 dai, dundai, 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 dai, dundai, 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 dai, dundai, dundai. Dundai, dundai, dai. We are seated. Shkoyach Adiel. Shkoyach Cindy. We are seated. The Haftorah in just a minute. The Haftorah is on page 580. On page 580. And as you know, we began as a community to read Torah about 2,500 years ago, and rough guess. And about 2,300 years ago, we began to attach a similar element from the book of prophets to the Torah reading. Attach is haftar. Haftarah means to attach or to supplement. So the haftarah, which is found here on page 580, attaches something from the second series of scripture, the Tanakh, the Nevi'im, the prophets, to the Torah reading. The theme for the past 5 weekly Torah readings has been the construction of this tabernacle so that every individual in the entire community had a feeling of being connected to God in a tangible manner. And as I said, perhaps 400 years later, the temple was built. And so here we have on page 580, an excerpt from the book of Kings, where Solomon is bringing forth and dedicating people and the building itself. So just to point, chapter 8, Solomon convoked the elders and all the heads of the tribes to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord from the city of David, that is Sion. Where was the ark before? It was somewhere. Maybe the Mishkan was still there. It's not spelled out. But the tabernacle and the Mishkan had been operational. Now it's time to move the ark, which is a small box containing the plaques of the law that Moses brought down, into the temple itself. So this is the grand ceremony. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nviim tovim v'ratzah b'divrei hamanim emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah u'v'Moshe avdo u'v'Yisrael amo v'nviei hamet v'tzedek. Az yaker Shlomo et zignei Yisrael et kol roshei amatot nisiei avot livnei Yisrael el hamelech Shlomo Yerushalayim lalot et Aron brit Adonai meir David hit Zion vayikalo el hamelech Shlomo kol ish Yisrael b'yerach etanim bechag hu hachodesh hashvi'i vayavo kol zignei Yisrael vayisu hakohanim et ha'aron vayalu et Aron Adonai v'to el moed v'kol klei hakodesh asher ba'ohel vayalu otam hakohanim v'halvim v'melech Shlomo kol adat Yisrael anoadim alav ito lifnei Haron mezabchim tzon uvakar asher lo yisafru v'lo yimanu merov vayaviu hakohanim et Aron brit Adonai el mekomo el devir habayit el kodesh hakodeshim el tachah kanfei hakruvim ki hakruvim porshim kanafayim el makom ha'aron vayasaku hakruvim al ha'aron v'al badav milamala v'yarichu habadim v'yra'u roshei habadim and hakodesh el panei adavir v'leru hachutza v'yu sham ad hayom hazeh ein Baron rak shnei luchot avanim asher hinach shom Moshe b'chorev asher karat Adonai b'nei Yisrael b'tzeit meretz Mitzrayim vayhi b'tzeit hakohanim min hakodesh v'anan malei et beit Adonai v'yachlo hakohanim lamo l'shrei min b'nei Anan ki malei chavod Adonai et beit Adonai. Az amar Shlomo Adonai amar lishkon v'arafel bano v'aniti beit zvulach machon shitcha olamim vayasev hamelech et panav vayavarech et kol kal Yisrael omed vayomer Baruch Adonai Elohei Yisrael asher diber b'fiv et David avi uv'yado milei lemor min hayom asher hotzeiti et ami et Yisrael miMitzrayim lo b'charti b'ir Mikol shitei Yisrael livnot ba'et liot shmi sham v'avchar b'David liot alami Yisrael vayhi im levav David avi livnot ba'et l'shem Adonai Elohei Yisrael. Vayomer Adonai el David avi yan asher haya im levavcha livnot ba'et l'shmi hetivota keya im levavecha rak ata lo tibnei habayit ki mimcha yotzei machletzecha hu yibnei habayit l'shmi vayokem Adonai et devaro asher diber vakum tachat David avi v'yeshev al kisei Yisrael Kasher diber Adonai v'bnei Abayit l'shem Adonai Elohei Yisrael v'asim sham makom la'aron asher Sham Brit Adonai Asher Karat Im Avotenu Botzio Otam Meretz Mitzrayim Baruch Atah Macholam Tzukol Olamim Tzadi B'Kol Adorot El Ne'aman Homer V'Yoseh Amadever Mekayim Shekol Devorav Emet V'Tzedek Ne'aman Atorah Noleinu B'Ne'amonim V'Charim V'Barech Achor Le'Shuv Rekam Ki Amach Ne'aman Rachama Ata Baruch Atah Adonai El Ne'aman B'Chol Devorav Rachem al Tzion ki beit chayenu, v'lo b'nefesh abim rav yameinu, Baruch atah Adonai, v'sameach Tzion b'banecho. Samcheinu Adonai b'dvar b'decha, makbid v'b'shech b'mir yavo, b'gel libenu, al kisol lo yeshev zar. Baruch atah Adonai, Magen David. Ala Torah, V'alavodav, Alim, Yom HaShabbat, Asher Natata Lanu, Anolim, Yishav L'nochel L'chavol Tifaret, Ala Kol, Nachmodim Lach, M'rechim Atah Yipashol Med, Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Just a line called out to me as I was chanting the Haftorah, and I wish to make a comment, and then we'll continue with our service. On page 581, it's verse number 7. 581, verse number 7. It's, again, Book of Kings, chapter 8, verse number 7. Kruvim are these little figures, and when the Torah first, and then other parts of the Bible, when the Tanakh being translated into English, people didn't know what Kruv was. So they transliterated Kruv into the best English, and that's Cherub, which some people pronounce in English as cherub. So that doesn't really explain what a Kruv is. To say a Kruv is a cherub and cherub is a Kruv, so what? So a Kruv is a little figure, and the understanding in the days of the Torah, and here, 300 years later, is that there were small wings. So it was a statue of wings. But these two Kruvim were seated on top of the ark, and the ark was about yay big, which means that the Kruvim had to be about this big and this big, facing each other. And their wings were facing each other. They literally were just small inches apart from each other, like this big, because the whole structure is this big. So to have two Kruvim, which some people call angels, fine if you want to use that term, facing each other with just an inch of distance between. And there's a reference in the book of Exodus, for it's that inch of empty space between these two winged creatures, features, artistic elements, where God dwells. This is an enormous tabernacle that we just saw constructed after 5 Torah readings. We have this enormous, elegant building. And where's God? God's presence is at this space this big between two features that are facing each other. So if we want to take hold of that and make a little sermon in our own day, 2,000 years after this temple no longer operated, where do we find God's presence? We have a gorgeous building here, beautiful golden ark, all these gorgeous stained glass, and you should see these stained glass with the light coming in. Beautiful place. Where's God's presence? God's presence is in the 1 inch or 2 inches between you and me. When we face each other. When we face each other, that's where God's presence is. When we turn our backs on each other. Literally and also symbolically in terms of how we interact with each other, God's presence departs. So it's up to us to always turn our faces towards each other, not only physically, but in terms of our attitude. And when we bring our attitudes this close together, God's presence is here. On page 177, please rise, a prayer for our nation. On page 177, a prayer for our country. In the Siddur on page 177. Excuse me. The bottommost paragraph on page 177. May it be your will that our land be a blessing to all who dwell on earth, and may you cause all peoples to dwell in friendship and freedom. Speedily fulfill the vision of your prophets. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. For all of them, from the least of them to the greatest, shall know me. And let us say, Amen. The top of 178, the first sentence in Hebrew, followed by the English paragraph, our prayer for Israel. Avinu Shabashamayim, Tzur Yisrael, V'go Alo, Barech et Medinat Yisrael, Reishit Tzmichat Geulatenu. Avinu Shabashamayim, stronghold and redeemer of the people Israel, bless the state of Israel, the beginning of our redemption. Shield it with your love. Spread over it the shelter of your peace. Guide its leaders and advisors with your light and your truth. Help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Deliver them. Crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace and its inhabitants with lasting joy. And let us say, Amen. Page 183. Gadiel? I'm going to carry the towel around. Carry the towel around. Yahalu et Shem Adonai, Kiniskav Shemo Levado, Hodo al Eretz V'Shamayim, Vayarem Keren Lamo, Tila Lechol Chasidav, Livnei Yisrael Am Krovo, Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Mizmor David, Havul Adonai Bnei Elim, Havul Adonai, Kavod V'Ozai, Havul Adonai, Kevod Shemo Ishtach, Havul Adonai, Badrat Kodesh, Kol Adonai Al Hamayim, Elak Kavod Hirim, Adonai, Amayim Ravim, Kol Adonai, Bakoach, Kol Adonai Be'adar, Kol Adonai Shaber Arazim, Vashaber Adonai Hetar Zehavanon, Vayarkidem Kemo Egel, Lebanon, Vesirion, Kemo Ben Re'emim, Kol Adonai Chotze Lahabotesh, Kol Adonai Yachil Midbar, Yachil Adonai Midbar Kadesh, Kol Adonai Yachol Alayalot, Vayechesof Ye'arot Uvechalo, Kulo Omer Kavod, Adonai Lama Boyashava Yeshev Adonai Melech Leolam, Adonai Oz Lamoyiten Adonai Avarek Adamo Vashalom, Yadai The top of page 184, the top stanza, the last three lines. Eitz Chaim Hi L'machazikim Ba V'tomcheha Meushar Derocheha Darchei Noam V'chol Netivoteha Shalom Hashivenu Adonai Elecha V'nashuva Chodesh Yameinu Chodesh Yameinu Kekedem. Remaining standing, please. Yitgadal, Yitgadal Shemei Rabba, B'chayechon v'yom, Echon v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, Bagala, U'beisman Kariv, V'imero, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevarach, Olam Liolme Omaya Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yidhadar V'yitalal Shemei D'Kedusha B'rechu Le'elam K'berchata V'shirata Tush B'chata V'nechemata Da'amiran B'yolma V'yimeru Amen. Please turn to page 191, remaining standing. We're taking hold of the last bracha of the Musaf Amida. It's Sim Shalom. It's a command to God. What could you and I command God to do? And the answer is to put peace in the world. Sim Shalom. And it's within this paragraph, this famous bracha, this blessing, that we also find the name Ahavas Chesed, the name of our synagogue. So God, we need help putting peace in the world and loving kindness and honor and respect and dignity and justice. That's what we're singing. It's on page 191 in the transliteration, the red ink on the facing page. Sim shalom tova uracha. Sim shalom tova uracha. Chen v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael amecha. Barchenu avinu kulanu ki'echad b'or panecha. Yada da 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 da. Sim shalom tova uracha. Sim shalom tova uracha. Ki b'or panecha natata lanu Eloheinu, Torat Chaim, Ahavas Chesed, Utzedaka, Uracha, V'rachamim, V'chayim, V'shalom. Sim shalom tova uracha. Sim shalom tova uracha. V'tov benecha lavarech et amcha Yisrael. B'chol et u'b'chol shah b'shlomecha. Yada da 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 da. Sim shalom tova uracha. Sim shalom tova uracha. We are seated. Kaddish Shalem is on page 203. Yikara B'Kara Shemer Rabba Be'amas V'Yimeru Amen Yeshmer Rabba Mevorach Olam Li'ol Me'ol Maya Yitborach V'Yishtabach V'Yishtabach V'Kodesh Abrichu V'Yimeru Amen Tikab Shalimeru, Amen, Shalimeru, Amen, Osir Shlomo V'Yosir Shalom, Shalimeru, Amen. Page 204. En Keloheinu, En Kadonenu, En Kemalkeinu, En Kemoshienu, Micheloheinu, Michadonenu, Michemalkeinu, Michmoshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shekatiru, Avotenu, Lefanecha, It Ktoret Hasamim. Before Elena, just a couple of reminders. Tonight, of course, at 7 o'clock, we have Zoom Havdalah. Tomorrow, for those inclined to come to the Shul Cemetery, the unveiling for Philip Reddish's headstone will be at 12:30. The family's request, 12:30. Yeah, 12:30. The family's requesting wearing masks and those vaccinated, and it's a way that we can show our honor to our departed Shul member, family member and friend, Philip Reddish, demonstrating love and memory. That's at the Shul Cemetery. That's tomorrow at 12:30. Monday, Tanakh studies on Zoom at noon. Tuesday, Adult Hebrew is on Zoom at 3. Adult Spirit discussion is at 5. And I think that's it for right now. So we can rise for the Elenu on page 205. Aleinu leshabeach ladon hakol latet gedula leotzer breshit shelo asana kugoye aratzot velo samanu kimishpachot adama shelo sam chelkenu kahem vegor aleinu kechol hamonam v'anachnu korim umishtachavim Omodim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu shehu noteh shamayim v'yosei haaretz umoshav yekaro b'shamayim imal ushchinatu zo begavei miromim hu Eloheinu ein od Emet Malkeinu Evesulato Kakatu B'Torato Yadata Yom Vashevota El Levavecha Ki Adonai Hu Elohim B'Shamayim Mimal V'Al Haaretz Mitachat Einod. Kakatu b'toratecha, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, v'ne'emar b'aya Adonai, le'melech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu, yiyeh Adonai echad, U'shemo echad. The Mourner's Kaddish is on page 207. And on this Shabbat, we remember with great love Samuel Edelbaum, Harold Reddish, Myron Idelson, Leon Reddish, Mary Rossner, Sharon Hamburger, John Murray, Jesse Thomas, Molly Gross, Anthony Arnold. Are there any other names to mention today? And perhaps those joining in at home have a name to add as well. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'olma divara chirute v'yamlich malchute, b'chayechonu v'yomechon, v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'zaman kari v'miru, amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach la'olam l'mei maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kedusha b'richu, La'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'ami ran ba'olma v'miru, amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim oleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'miru, amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom oleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'miru, amen. Our hearts join with each other to extend love and hope and support to all those who are grieving, all those who are mourning, and may they all have peace. We'll conclude in a moment with the Adon Olam on page 211. Lisa, Allison, Oren, you feel like joining us on the beamer for Adon Olam? Oren, you feel like Adon Olam? Mike's on. Page 211.
Lam asher malach b'terem kol yitzir nibra li'et nasa b'chefso kol azai melech
Shemoni
kravi acharei kichlot hakol levado imloch nora v'hu haya v'hu oveh
Vehu yiyeh
v'tifara v'hu echad v'ein sheni le'am shilo le'achbira v'li reshit v'li tachlit v'lo ha'oz v'ha'nisra v'hu eli v'chai go'ali v'tzor chavli b'yetzara v'hu nisi umanosli
Menatosi b'yom ekra
b'yado afkid ruchi b'yei dishon v'ya'ira b'im ruchi geviati Adonai li v'lo ira.
Will you lead us in Kiddush? This is grape juice, this is wine. B'shamru? That's grape juice.
And this is wine?
That's wine.
Oh, may I have whichever one I'd like?
Absolutely. Grape juice or wine. If you have wine or grape juice at home, feel free to join along for Kiddush. It's V'shamru. And maybe hamotzi as well if you have a piece of bread at home.
V'shamru
V'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et
ha-Shabbat l'dorotam berit haolam.
V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam berit haolam. Beini umei b'nei Yisrael oti le'olam, oti le'olam, oti le'olam. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam berit haolam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam berit haolam. Uvayom hashvi'i Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam berit haolam. Al Kim Baruch Adonai et Yom HaShabbat v'kadshehu savri. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Some people remember that traditionally before making hamotzi, yadayim, which means to prepare our hands. It's a way of focusing our minds as we're about to, go ahead, in a moment, just make the hamotzi.
There's no sussing or anything like that in this, is there?
I don't know inside. Nothing on top.
Okay.
Sesame allergy?
That's fine.
I think it's regular.
Figure it out. We'll figure it out.
Okay.
He's gonna want it.
Oh.
Yep.
Amen.
Good Shabbos. Thanks for joining in. We appreciate your being here. You are part of us, and we are part of you. May God continue to bless you always. Litrod until we see each other soon. Good Shabbos.